The Scottish Enlightenment, The Scots Invention of the Modern World by Arthur Herman. Chapter 8, A Select Society, Adam Smith and His Friends. Section 1. The post coach left Glasgow for Edinburgh at 8 o'clock every morning, except Sundays. Loaded with mail and passengers, it made the winding trip through the farms and the villages of Lancashire and West Lothian, with an overnight stop halfway. It was one of only 2 coach lines in Scotland, and in 1760 the trip took a day and a half. But it allowed a traveler such as Adam Smith to reach Edinburgh by noon, spend the afternoon and evening there with friends and colleagues, and then return to Glasgow by dinner the next day. Now with Smith the only commuter, the chemist Joseph Black, political scholar John Miller, and other Glasgow intellectuals regularly made the same trip. In fact, for more than 40 years, the post coach was the linchpin. One could almost say the lifeline, connecting the twin halves of the Scottish Enlightenment, Glasgow and Edinburgh. Scotland offered a third centre of a civilizing and modernizing activity, namely Aberdeen. It would play its crucial role in the making of the modern world too, as well as we will see. But in the years after the 45, Glasgow and Edinburgh were truly the twin cities of enlightenment and change. In a crucial way, they complemented each other. Glasgow was more innovative and practical. It knew how things were made and how to get things done. Older attitudes, including a deep-rooted Calvinism, were stronger there. But thanks to its commercial success, it was also more free-willing. James Watt, engineer and a self-taught philosopher, was a natural in Glasgow. He would have seemed a fish out of water in Edinburgh. Edinburgh was more artistic and literary, more intellectual in the abstract sense. It still is. In the 18th century, it was a home to writers, poets, and painters, rather than engineers and experimental scientists. But we should not overdraw the contrasts. What really made Edinburgh different, and what attracted outsiders as diverse as Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin, and the young Robert Burns, was its close-knit community of scholars and thinkers, who were willing to take up new ideas while putting old ones to the test of discussion and criticism. Edinburgh was, as contemporaries said, a hotbed of genius. It sharpened minds, inspired originality, and intensified that sense of purposeful activity that every thinker, writer, or artist needs to be truly productive and creative. Only London and Paris could compete with Edinburgh as an intellectual center. But unlike those 2 world capitals, Edinburgh's cultural life was not dominated by state institutions or aristocratic saloons and patrons. It depended instead on a circle of tough-minded, self-directed intellectuals and men of letters, or literati, as they called themselves. By the standards of the 1760, it was remarkably democratic. It was a place where all ideas were created equal, where brains rather than social rank took a pride of a place, and where serious issues could be debated with, in the words of Lord Shaftesbury. The sword of freedom, which is taken amongst gentlemen friends who know each other well. This was in part because everybody was the neighbor of everyone else. Passing down from the high street, each turn of any given close offered the house or lodging of another writer or intellectual. Allan Ramsay, Lord Kemps, David Hume, William Robertson, William Ferguson, John Home, all lived virtually within shouting distance of one another. Edinburgh was like a giant think tank or artist colony, except that unlike most modern think tanks, this one was not cut off from everyday life. It was in the thick of it. Edinburgh's intellectuals fully entered into the old town's traditions of a boisterous and informal society. Given the close and intimate quarters, social barriers went by the board. An English visitor was amazed to discover that the shrine of festivities for Edinburgh's best families was a local oyster house, with huge tables piled high with oysters, over which men and women stood swigging flagons of porter, and then leaping on to the dance floor for a series of high stepping reels and flings. Edinburgh people, he noted, are exceedingly fond of a jovial company, and it was true of the city's literati as well. Some, like David Hume, grew up associating good food and drink with intellectual discussion at Lord Kemps' dinner table. Others simply like good food and drink, especially drink. The clothes and the wines of Edinburgh flowed with alcohol. Drinking, according to one contemporary, engrossed the leisure hours of all professional men, scarcely excepting even the most stern and dignified. Half of the bench of the Court of Session, he reckoned, were well oiled before they met in the morning, which may have had something to do with the shrewd, raucous, and often hilarious comments by judges, such as Kemps and Lord Braxfield. When St. Giles's bells played out 11:30 in the morning, writes one historian, each citizen went to get a gill of ale, which was known as his meridian. Although before breakfast he had paid a similar visit. People did business deeds, signed legal documents and wills, organized their university lectures, or planned a father's funeral with the help of a glass or a dram. Many of the city's most important intellectual movements began with a gathering in a tavern, discussion of a pressing political or theological issue, without bottles on the table and loud gusts of laughter, was inconceivable. In vino veritas, in wine the truth, as the ancient Romans said, and the people of Edinburgh, who were great admirers of the Romans, did their best to live up to the maxim. In vino veritas, in wine the truth. The drink of choice was not whiskey, still considered crude and provincial, or beer, but claret. plentiful supplies of Bordeaux wine were the legacy of Scotland's medieval ties to France. The Old Alliance, and every Scottish gentleman was a connoisseur, with his own preferred vintages and his private cellar. After 1707, as the English taste for port or sherry began to seep northwards, continuing to drink claret became almost a patriotic act. John Home even composed a short verse about it. Clear-eyed and proud the noble Caledonian stood, his claret old and his mutton good. Let him drink port, the Saxon cried. He drank the poison, and the spirit died. A gentleman or writer would be routinely identified as a 2 or 3 bottle man, depending on how much claret he consumed at a meal or single sitting. But unlike the modern writer, he did not consume his alcohol as part of a solitary purgatory. He did his drinking surrounded by charming and lively company, and usually under the auspices of one of Edinburgh's numerous social clubs. There was the Tuesday Club, the Poker Club, named after not the card game but the fire poker, for stirring things up. The Oyster Club, of which Adam Smith was a regular member, the Mirror Club, and many others. Most mixed serious intellectual business with imbibing and socializing. The Mirror Club, which met at a tavern in Parliament Square, promoted the papers and discussion on the cultural improvement of Scotland's land-owning class. The Racinian Club tackled philosophical topics in its tavern and kept up a regular correspondence with the philosopher George Berkeley. Berkeley admitted that its members were among the few critics who really understood his theories. The most important of these clubs was the Select Society. It was founded in 1754 with the help of Allan Ramsay, the painter, son of the old bookseller and poet. As its name implied, it saw itself as a gathering place for Edinburgh's elite, except this was an intellectual, not a social or political elite. The original 32 members included William Robertson, John Home, David Hume, Adam Smith, Camp's erudite colleague Lord Montbodor, Alexander Carlyle, and Hugh Blair. Later members included Adam Ferguson, who joined in the spring of 1756, and Lord Camps himself. As with Montbodor and Camps, most of its titled members took their peerages with their service on the judicial bench. The rest owed their prominence to their pens or to their status in one of the middle-class professions. For 10 years, it was the central forum of Edinburgh's Republic of Letters. A paper or talk presented there received a fairer and more rigorous hearing than it could from any academic university audience. As one participant put it, the informal proceedings made the literati of Edinburgh less captious and pedantic than they were elsewhere. The astonishing diversity of the views and the experience of its members made it particularly valuable. By 1760, writes historian Richard Shear. The select society included virtually every prominent man of letters and taste in the Edinburgh's vicinity, as well as a host of physicians, architects, military officers, merchants, magistrates, and above all, lawyers. Lawyers, yes, but also Presbyterian ministers. Membership in the select society overlapped with all the other important intellectual associations in Edinburgh, including the Poker Club, founded in 1762, and the Edinburgh Society for Encouraging Arts, Sciences, and Manufactures and Agriculture in Scotland, which became the Select Society's successor when the original club dissolved in 1763. It also provided the editorial board for the very first Edinburgh Review, which included the distinguished professor of moral philosophy from Glasgow, Adam Smith, and at the core of each we find the same list of names, all of them prominent clergymen: William Robertson, John Home, Hugh Blair, Alexander Carlyle, John Jardine, and slightly later Adam Ferguson. We met most of them before as Edinburgh volunteers in the 45 and exponents of the Whig cause. Now, 20 years later, they dominated the discussion of ideas and issues. They were, in fact, the great movers and shakers of the city's cultural life. This too made the Scottish Enlightenment unique. At its core was a group of erudite and believing clergymen, unlike the various abbeys of the French Enlightenment, who were by and large skeptics and clerics only as a matter of convenience and income. They resolutely believed that a free and open, sophisticated culture was compatible with, even predicted on, a solid moral and religious foundation. Robertson and the rest saw the doctrines of Christianity as the very heart of what it meant to be modern. Robertson said, "Christianity not only sanctifies our souls, but refines our manners." As Hugh Blair put it, religion civilizes mankind. Refinement and civility now meant much more than just polite manners and fine taste in clothes and music. They referred to a historical process in which the entire cultural frame of a society, the political and the moral, as well as the literary and artistic, comes to reflect the same stimulating and liberating power of a social interaction. Through the complex connections of a commercial society, the mind acquires new vigor and enlarges its powers and faculties, and industry, knowledge, and humanity are linked together by an indissoluble chain. It makes men free and enlarge their power to do good. Virtue and enlightenment move together step by step. To the enlightened Edinburgh clerics, Christianity both epitomized this cultural process and described its final goal. The moral teachings of Christianity were in effect a shortcut to refinement, but only if the church itself reflected that refinement. Beginning in 1751, Robertson, Blair, Home, and their friends took on the task of bringing the kirk into the modern world, even in the teeth of a bitter opposition from Presbyterian hardliners. The battle raged back and forth in the General Assembly and in a series of public controversies. The old conservatives, the so-called evangelicals, had the advantage of numbers and the backing of rural congregations, which were by and large satisfied with the old fire and brimstone style. The Robertson Group had the advantage of organization and unity of purpose, plus the support of educated laymen in places such as the Select Society, the landed nobility, and the press, the voice of enlightened public opinion. They called themselves the Moderate Party to set them apart from both the religious extremism of a Kirk that still officially approved the execution of Thomas Aikenhead and the religious skepticism of a man such as the English deists or their friend David Hume. Their hero was Francis Hutchinson, and they offered a compassionate, enlightened Presbyterianism that they believed would be in step with a modern commercial society. The moderates boasted champions such as Robertson, by then the most famous historians in Britain, and John Home, author of the enormously successful historical drama Douglas. The best of the evangelicals could offer was a minister from East Lothian named John Witherspoon, who published a devastating anti-moderate satire called the Ecclesiastical Characteristics, which was so well written and funny that even the moderates admired it and bought copies. In one passage, Witherspoon offered this mock advice to the aspiring enlightened clergyman on how to write his Sunday sermon. Number 1, all his subjects must be confined to social duties as opposed to religious doctrines. Number 2, there must be no reference to an afterlife. Number 3, his authorities must be drawn from pagan writers, and none, or as few as possible, from holy scriptures. Number 4, he must be very unacceptable to the common people. Very telling, especially the last point, which reminded the people how Robertson and his friends from groups such as the Select Society represented a new kind of cultural elitism. Yet the very fact that the moderates' most formidable opponent had to resort to a secular literary genre, the satire, to score his points showed who was really winning and who was losing the overall battle. In 1756, the moderates managed to prevent official censure of David Hume by the General Assembly. In December of that year, the pillar of the old orthodoxy, Reverend George Anderson, died. Hugh Blair was already minister at St. Giles, Edinburgh's biggest church. 5 years later, William Robertson was named the principal of the University of Edinburgh, and Blair became its professor of rhetoric. Reading the handwritten on the wall, Witherspoon accepted an offer from the American colonies he had declined before, to become a president of the College of New Jersey in Princeton. In that guise, he will reappear in the next chapter, playing a very different role from that of moderate basher and defender of the old-time religion. But in 1768, his departure for America marked the final triumph of the moderates and their vision of an enlightened Church of Scotland. We have mentioned that one of the moderates' heroes was Francis Hutchinson. Another, at least by 1759, was Hutchinson's former pupil Adam Smith. His early lectures, given in Edinburgh at the behest of Lord Kemps, heavily influenced their notion of poetry and literature, or belles lettres, as a cultural bellwether, and of clear, elegant English as the best vehicle for modern literary communication. The model Smith himself had proposed was Jonathan Swift. They were also impressed by his theory of moral sentiments, which reworked Hutchinson's theory of innate moral sense. William Robertson used Smith's lectures on natural law and the four-stage theory of civil society for his own history of Europe, so much so that Smith previously accused him of plagiarism. All this shows that long before he published his inquiry into the nature and the causes of the wealth of nations, Adam Smith was a prominent and influential figure in Edinburgh circles. He attended the meetings of the Select Society and the Poker Club, and went to the dinner parties of even non-intellectual citizens. As a guest, he could be trying. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was usually at a great length. Alexander Collier remembered Adam Smith as the most absent man in company that I ever saw, moving his lips and talking to himself and smiling in the midst of large companies. Once, when he had started on long harangue, criticizing a leading Scottish politician, someone discreetly pointed out that the man's closest relative was also sitting in the table. They care, Smith muttered. It's all true. That's the end of section 1.